They thought they could measure worth by money, status, and skin color. But when the truth came out, right in the middle of the wedding ceremony, their smug smiles collapsed, and the entire room gasped. What happened that night wasn't just a wedding story, it was justice unfolding in real time. Weddings are supposed to unite families, to celebrate love, to build bridges. But sometimes they reveal the ugliest truths hidden behind polished smiles. This is the story of how one bride's family mocked, dismissed, and humiliated the groom's black parents, only to face a revelation that turned the entire wedding upside down. Stay with me, because what begins as an insult ends as one of the most powerful lessons in respect you'll ever hear. The room was warm with candlelight, crystal glasses clinking against white linen, laughter bouncing off chandeliers. It was supposed to be a night of celebration, two families joining before the vows, a rehearsal dinner glowing with love. But under that polished veneer, something else simmered, something sharp. It started with a look. Mrs. Langford, slender, pearl necklace tight against her throat, her smile practiced like a politician's. Let her gaze flick over Marcus's parents. The pause was subtle, but long enough to slice. Her lips tightened, just a fraction, before she leaned toward her husband. A whisper, followed by a chuckle. Marcus caught it. He always caught it. His stomach clenched, not because he was ashamed of his parents, but because he knew what was coming. He'd seen it before, on trains, at restaurants, at his prep school. The glance, the whisper, the smirk that spread like a virus across a table. "Marcus," Mrs. Langford said sweetly, raising her wine glass. "Darling, your parents, they must be so proud. It's not every day their son marries into," she paused deliberately, eyes sparkling with condescension, "our kind of family." The room stiffened. A few guests coughed. The bride, Emily, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Marcus's mother, Lorraine, sat composed, her dark skin glowing under the candlelight, her navy dress cut with quiet elegance. She folded her hands neatly in her lap and offered only a small smile, the kind that hid storms. Beside her, Harold, tall, shoulders broad from years of discipline, his salt and pepper hair trimmed immaculately, placed a calming hand on hers. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Our kind of family," he echoed, voice low but steady. Mrs. Langford laughed, the kind of laugh meant to dismiss and dominate at once. "Oh, don't be sensitive. I simply mean, well, let's be honest. Your parents, what do they do again? I heard something about teaching or community work." Her tone wrapped those words in disdain, like they were stains on her silver tablecloth. Emily's face flushed. "Mother." But her father chimed in, cutting her off. Yes, and we don't mean any harm. We're simply curious. It's just, you see, Emily's family has a legacy. Generations of business, investments, philanthropy. It's tradition." He leaned back smugly. "We've always believed that pedigree matters." The silence was thick enough to choke on. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few tried to smile, tried to change the subject, but the damage was done. Lorraine inhaled softly, straightening her posture. She did not flinch, did not lower her gaze. Instead, she spoke with the calm precision of a woman who had learned long ago that dignity was her sharpest weapon. "I was a schoolteacher for 32 years, she said softly, her voice carrying farther than the Langfords expected. "I taught children to read, to write, to believe they mattered. Many of those children are now lawyers, surgeons, and professors. Some of them may even be sitting in this very city council you donate to." A ripple of murmurs went through the crowd. "And I," Harold added, his baritone steady, "spent my life building, not just in one field, but across many. I built communities, businesses, futures." He looked directly at the bride's father. The kind of work that doesn't need to be announced at cocktail parties. The Langfords smirked, clearly unimpressed. To them, it sounded like embellishment. "Community work," Mr. Langford said dismissively. "How noble. But let's be frank, money sustains legacies. Status secures futures. And when Emily walks down that aisle, we want to know she's walking into a life that matches where she came from." Marcus felt his fists clench beneath the table. He glanced at Emily, her eyes glistening, torn between love and the heavy weight of her family's arrogance. Lorraine simply reached for a glass of water and sipped, as though the Langfords' insults rolled off her like rain. Harold leaned back, unreadable, like a lion that didn't need to roar to remind others it was a predator. But Marcus burned inside. Every fiber in him screamed to defend them, to shout that his parents weren't just equal to these people, they far surpassed them. That their wealth made the Langfords' investments look like pocket change. That their philanthropy wasn't photo ops, but lives rebuilt, scholarships funded, hospitals erected. But his parents had always taught him, power reveals itself at the right time. So Marcus swallowed his anger, knowing the stage was being set. Because the Langfords had no idea who they had just insulted. And the reveal, when it came, would leave the entire room gasping. The dinner moved forward, but the air never quite recovered. The insult had landed like glass shattering on marble. Everyone pretended not to see the shards, but each step crunched underfoot. Emily forced a smile, tried to pull conversation toward the honeymoon plans, the flower arrangements, the little quirks of her fiancé she adored. But each attempt slid off the polished stone faces of her parents. They weren't done. They never were. "Marcus," her father said suddenly, swirling the Merlot in his glass. "Tell me, son, what exactly is it you do? I hear consulting tossed around, but forgive me, that term is so vague these days." His grin was polite, but his eyes sharpened like knives. Consulting doesn't build empires. It doesn't provide for generations. What do you really bring to this marriage besides a handsome smile? The words were bait, pure and simple. And Marcus knew if he snapped back, it would be painted as aggression. If he stayed silent, it would be painted as inadequacy. The trap was familiar, cruel, and deliberate. Emily reached for Marcus's hand under the table. "Dad." But Marcus answered calmly, though his jaw pulsed tight. "I bring love, dedication, and a future I've been building long before tonight." The answer was honest, but not what the Langfords wanted. Mrs. Langford chuckled into her wineglass. "How romantic," she murmured, the word dripping with dismissal. At the far end of the table, an older aunt of Emily's leaned toward her neighbor and whispered too loudly, "I just hope their children don't forget which side of the family set the standard." The whisper landed like a slap. Emily's knuckles whitened around Marcus's hand. Guests exchanged awkward glances. Some looked down into their plates. Others tried to smile, to pretend they hadn't heard. But the wound was already bleeding in plain sight. Lorraine finally spoke again, her voice soft but carrying through the hush. "It's always telling, isn't it?" she said, setting her glass down carefully. "When people measure worth by last names or by bank accounts, rather than by character. By resilience. By what kind of love they bring into a home." "Exactly," Emily said quickly, her voice cracking with urgency. "That's what matters." But Mr. Langford leaned forward, cutting through his daughter's plea. "Idealism is lovely, but idealism doesn't pay for private schools. Idealism doesn't secure real estate, investments, or influence. We live in the real world, Emily. And in the real world, families like ours, we look after our own." Marcus's throat burned, but still he stayed quiet, watching his parents, studying the restraint etched on their faces. He saw it in his father's stillness, in the way Harold's eyes flicked across the table, weighing every word, every gesture, like a chess master letting his opponent believe they were winning. Because Marcus knew, his father didn't argue when he could demonstrate. His mother didn't spar when she could outlast. And when the time was right, when truth finally broke through the arrogance, their silence would roar louder than any insult hurled tonight. Yet that didn't stop the little stabs. "So," Mrs. Langford said suddenly, looking directly at Lorraine, her pearls gleaming against her skin. "If you taught for so many years, I suppose you must be retired now? It must be nice. Free time for hobbies. Bridge, gardening, something like that." She smiled thinly, as though dismissing a life's work into quaint pastimes. Lorraine returned the smile, unshaken. "I still mentor. I still invest. And I still teach, though now it's young leaders, not children." Her gaze locked briefly with Mrs. Langford's. And what I plant these days grows a little taller than roses." The words lingered like perfume, subtle but potent. A few guests who understood, who'd seen Lorraine's name whispered among philanthropists and on hospital wings, sat straighter. They knew, but they stayed quiet, waiting, knowing the Langfords would have to learn the hard way. Emily's brother, Nathan, leaned back with a smirk. "Investing, huh? Stocks? Real estate? Everyone dabbles these days. But serious wealth, that takes generations. We've had ours for 100 years. He tapped his glass against the table. "Old money. It's in the blood. Or in the mindset," Harold said finally, his voice calm but resonant, like a drumbeat in a quiet church. "Some people inherit money and squander it. Others build something from nothing that outlasts lifetimes." Nathan's smirk faltered. Lorraine reached for Harold's hand gently, as if reminding him to hold back. She could see it in his eyes. The lion was stirring. Across the table, Marcus sat taller, his pulse quickening. Because he knew, every second the Langfords pushed, every smug laugh and careless insult, they dug their own grave deeper. They didn't realize they weren't humiliating his parents. They were setting themselves up for a reckoning. And when that reckoning came, it wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be boastful. It would be devastatingly quiet, like a curtain lifting, exposing the truth so blinding no one could look away. The wedding day dawned with sunlight spilling through stained glass windows, the kind of morning poets would have sworn was touched by divine hands. Guests filled the pews, satin and silk brushing against mahogany, chatter floating like nervous birds. The choir rehearsed their final notes, and everything shimmered with anticipation. Yet beneath the beauty, tension lingered. The Langfords still wore their smug smiles, whispering about the rehearsal dinner, convinced they'd placed Marcus's parents neatly in their imagined hierarchy. They thought the lesson had been taught, that their wealth was the crown jewel of the union. They didn't know the stage was set for their undoing. Marcus stood at the altar, his heart pounding, not from nerves, but from love. When Emily appeared at the end of the aisle, radiant in lace, everything else faded. He saw only her. She walked forward, eyes locked on his, defying the shadows of arrogance that tried to cloud their day. But fate has a way of arranging its own dramatic reveals. The officiant welcomed the families. And then, as tradition dictated, he invited the parents of the groom to stand and say a few words of blessing. Lorraine rose first. The room quieted. She didn't need to clear her throat or raise her voice. Her presence alone commanded attention. "For 32 years, she began, I taught children who were told they would never rise above the circumstances they were born into. Children who were underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. But I taught them anyway. I told them their names mattered. Their dreams mattered. And now those children are doctors, senators, inventors. My son is the man he is today because he saw that nothing, no prejudice, no arrogance, could diminish his worth." She glanced toward the Langfords, her gaze steady but not cruel. "And nothing ever will." The silence was electric. Then Harold stepped forward. "I spent my life building," he said, his voice echoing against the high ceilings. "Not just buildings, though there are towers in this city that carry my company's name. Not just companies, though there are dozens that thrive today because I believed in them when no one else would. I built futures. I built opportunity. I built so others could stand taller." Gasps rippled through the pews. People shifted, whispering, recognition dawning. The Langfords' eyes widened, their smug confidence cracking like plaster. Because the name Harold Carter was not obscure. It was etched on hospitals, on universities, on foundations. His face had been on magazine covers. His philanthropy was the backbone of institutions the Langfords bragged about donating to, and they hadn't even realized it. Lorraine and Harold Carter, dismissed as teachers and community workers, were billionaires. Not the kind who flaunted yachts and tabloids, but the kind whose quiet power shaped skylines and futures. Mrs. Langford's pearl necklace suddenly looked like costume jewelry. Mr. Langford's smirk collapsed into a thin, bloodless line. Nathan shifted uncomfortably in his tailored suit, realizing the very man he'd mocked was the one who'd likely owned the bank that financed his car. The weight of their arrogance pressed down on them, visible in their slumped shoulders, their flushed cheeks. Meanwhile, the rest of the guests leaned forward, a current of awe buzzing through the sanctuary. Respect shimmered in their eyes, not just for the wealth revealed, but for the restraint, the grace, the way the Carters had never needed to boast. Marcus's chest swelled with pride, not because of the money, but because the truth had surfaced in the most poetic way possible. His parents had never needed to shout. They had let dignity speak, and dignity had thundered louder than any insult. The ceremony continued, but the shift was irreversible. When vows were exchanged, when rings slid onto fingers, it wasn't just a marriage being sealed. It was a new order being written. Respect had been reclaimed. Afterward, at the reception, the Langfords approached quietly, their bravado stripped bare. Mrs. Langford's voice trembled as she stammered, We didn't realize." Lorraine cut her gently, but firmly. "You didn't care to realize. You looked, but you didn't see. You measured, but you didn't understand." Her eyes softened, but her tone stayed steady. "Now you know. Let's pray you treat the next person you meet with more respect than you gave us." It was the kind of rebuke that needed no shouting, a mirror held up to arrogance, forcing it to wither under its own reflection. And in that moment, the balance shifted. The Langfords were left humbled, not by riches, but by the undeniable truth. Character, dignity, and love outlast wealth, status, or pedigree. The night ended not with bitterness, but with celebration. Marcus and Emily danced beneath twinkling lights, their families watching, some with pride, some with chastened silence. Harold and Lorraine swayed together, decades of love anchoring them, their quiet power now undeniable to all. And when the final toast rose, it wasn't about money or lineage. It was about love, about respect, about the kind of legacy that can't be counted in dollars, but in dignity. The story spread far beyond the wedding. People whispered about it in offices, retold it at dinners, shared it in communities. And the moral was clear. Never judge someone's worth by the skin they wear or the assumptions you carry. True wealth is not what sits in bank accounts. It is what lives in character, in how we treat others, in the legacies we build of respect and compassion. Because arrogance collapses, prejudice crumbles, but dignity endures. So the next time you meet someone new, remember, you don't know their story. You don't know the mountains they've climbed, the futures they've built, the storms they've survived. Treat them with the respect they deserve, not the assumptions you hold. Because if you fail to, you might just find yourself humbled, too. In the end, wealth wasn't the real revelation. Dignity was. The Carters proved that respect is not demanded through arrogance, but earned through character. And the Langfords learned the hardest way possible that prejudice always collapses under truth. So remember this, never underestimate anyone. You don't know their journey, you don't know their story, and you never know the power they carry in silence. If this story moved you, share it, because respect is the one legacy we can all afford to leave behind. This is Unheard Evidence. Subscribe to our channel for more thrilling true life stories.